Hi, how are you this week? I am poorly. My son and I have both had a chest infection and it's taking a long time to recover, and he's actually tucked up in a little nest that I've made him in my office, and you can probably hear him snuffling in the background while I record this. And as frustrating as it is to have been taken out of action, I've also been really grateful for the opportunity to think more deeply about things. There's something about being stuck in bed for an extended period of time that allows you to see things more clearly. There's a real unplugging to it. And I've been reflecting a lot on the ways that I want to unplug from the system more deeply in the year ahead. So I'm really looking forward to sharing those reflections with you in future episodes. But for today, I'm going to share with you a conversation I had over on the Shaken and Not Burned podcast. I don't know if I should leave this in. I'm going to share a conversation I had over on the Shaken Not Burned podcast with sustainability journalist Giulia Bottaro. This interview is a great opportunity to immerse yourself in the basic principles underlying regenerative work. So if you're new here, what a great place to start shifting your career towards purpose and impact. Giulia and I talk about the definition of regenerative, crucial questions to ask yourself and evaluate potential opportunities, and importantly, how to avoid corporate greenwash. And if you're already a dedicated listener, then I hope this conversation will be an opportunity to remind yourself of the big why of this work, aligning your career with nature, climate, and community. Welcome to the Regenerative Work-Life podcast. If you are ready to make the leap out of your corporate job and into purposeful regenerative work, this is the show for you. As you've probably discovered, transitioning into regenerative work is a lot more complicated than going on a job board and sending off your CV. This journey you are embarking on means taking risks, going against the grain, overcoming challenges, and writing your own script. It takes entrepreneurial muscle, powerful vision, and a willingness to change. Having a mentor by your side makes all the difference. I am your host, Alyssa Murphy. I have worked with hundreds of impact-focused businesses and individuals, and I am here to help you. Let's take things one step at a time as I show you how to quit corporate, find your vision, and successfully transition into regenerative work. Here we go.
Hi, Alyssa. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm really happy to be here.
So normally I started these interviews by asking what the person does, but I know that you had a bit of a journey to get where you are now. So I was wondering if we could start with that.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I'll answer the question of what I do, and then I'll tell you the journey that took me up to this point. So I help purpose-seeking professionals to quit their corporate jobs and to build successful careers that are rooted in nature, climate, and community. So my business is Regenerative Work Life, and I help people navigate their way into their regenerative work lives. Now, I did not always do this, and the path to coming here was certainly a kind of a winding one. I have a particular affection for sort of winding career paths. I actually started out my career as an actor, and from acting and a very sort of surprising series of events, I ended up as the CEO of a startup in the carbon capture and storage space, which is a pretty wild leap from being an actor, and it happened very quickly. So I kind of took that on as the role of a lifetime, and a challenge that I wanted to meet. And yeah, learned a lot, had a very interesting time dealing with kind of heavy industry, but realized, quite early on that wasn't the path for me. And from there, I went on to found a company called Life Size Media. And Life Size, for the last 14 years, has been delivering communication campaigns for climate tech companies. So we specialized in that area really early on. So back in kind of 2010, when everyone called it clean tech, and people thought we were absolutely nuts to be trying to build an agency solely around clean tech. A lot of people told me that we were going to have to diversify, that it wasn't going to be able to build a viable business around it, but we believed in it and we stuck with it. And now we're 14 years later and we're the leading climate tech communications agency in Europe. But in terms of where my path sort of moved into the regenerative space, so I've been running Life Size for well over a decade, and two things kind of happened simultaneously. One is that I was pregnant with twins just before the pandemic, and my world was becoming very much smaller very rapidly. I'd gone from a lot of travel, working very long hours, like suddenly I just couldn't do that at all. And things just really, I had no choice but to slow down, and things became very kind of contained. My world kind of became my house and the short area I could walk around my house, and all the thing that we kind of all experienced in the pandemic, but it happened early because of my pregnancy. And then once we went into the pandemic, I just had a lot of space that I hadn't had before, a lot of space for reflection and introspection. And then I was sort of able to piece together that there were kind of questions that had been coming up for me around, after working in clean tech for well over a decade, the question kept coming up of, what is the tangible impact that we have had? So that we have had as a company, that we have had as a sector. At this point, I'd worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of clean tech companies. But if I were to sort of show somebody and say, look, there's the difference that it's made, I really struggled to answer that question. I worked with amazing people, incredible technologies, but I couldn't point to someone and go, yes, do you know what? The world is a better place today than it was back when we started in 2010. And that really, really bothered me. And, and it was just also time for a change. I knew I was kind of getting ready for the next chapter. I'd done a lot of work to set my team up to be able to run things without me when I had my babies. And I was kind of ready for the new chapter. So I sold Life Size to my team last year. So we're now an employee-owned company. Life Size continues to do great work. And I didn't know what was going to happen next. I think the obvious route would have been, moving into kind of consultancy or advisory, or, sitting as a non-exec on boards, something like that. None of that interested me. A lot of people thought I might go down a sort of like executive coaching role. At the time, that just didn't feel right either. And I went into this real period of exploration and not knowing and feeling quite lost. But now I can see with hindsight that I really needed that period. I really needed to detox from being an entrepreneur. I needed to discover who I was outside of the title of CEO and founder, which had really been so much my identity for a really, really long time. I needed to shift my mindset away from the idea that my value was intrinsically tied to my productivity and to the success and growth of the business, and just needed that space. And within it, I allowed myself to start exploring things just because they interested me, just because they sparked curiosity for me. And one of those things was coaching. I had no intention at all of becoming a coach, but I really liked this coach called Martha Beck. She's a coach in America. And I was really drawn to her books and to her content. So I was following her. And then I started getting these messages about coach training. I was like, do you not want to become a coach? But found myself signing up for this anyway. So I trained and qualified as a coach, and all kinds of things along the way. I mean, I just really went into this period where I would just say yes to things, even though they didn't make sense. And the rational part of my brain was like, what are you doing, Alyssa? So I found myself doing like forest bathing, which is like sitting in nature and learning to immerse yourself in nature. A lot of themes to do with nature. I did wild coaching sessions where I would take clients out and we would go into nature and do coaching in nature. I held retreats that were like play dates for grown-ups, or kind of forest school for grown-ups. And I had no idea where any of it was going until the beginning of this year, where the threads started to kind of weave together. And actually, I should say there's a really, really important factor, which is that I began to learn about regeneration. So I did an incredible learning experience called Rebiz, which is hosted by Ryan James and Erin Remblance. Cannot recommend it highly enough. It absolutely changed my world, changed my worldview. It's teaching very much rooted in Indigenous worldview and Indigenous knowledge. And yeah, that changed so much for me. And then I began to weave the threads together. And very quickly, actually, at the beginning of this year, the idea for regenerative work life formed. And I kind of knew very suddenly that I wanted to help people break free from corporate, and I wanted to help people align their careers with nature. And here was a way that finally I could reconcile this clear love of nature and this pull that I was feeling to be in the wild, to rewild myself, rewild my life, but also like the pretty extensive experience I had in the business world as an entrepreneur. And I realized I can bring these two things together and really have impact, because I really believe that the work that we choose to do is one of the biggest impact factors that we have. It's one of the most powerful tools that we have to make change happen. So that was my journey.
Wow, that's really inspiring. And on your last point, I completely agree that work is so important because it's 40 hours plus of our week. It takes the majority of our, more or less, the majority of our time. So, yeah, I completely agree that our career can have such a big impact. And when you were talking about your journey and the fact that you're helping people live their corporate careers, it feels like a good way to turn trends like the Great Resignation in a way that makes impact and helps people and the world. So yeah, I love that. That's really exciting and a bit unusual, I would say. I haven't heard much of these things. I don't know if maybe in your world is a bit more common.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think to me, this is one of the things about regenerative work, is that I think in the vast majority of cases, you're not looking at a situation where there's a predefined job title or a predefined role to move into. Maybe if you're more in sort of regenerative agriculture or conservation or an area like that where there's kind of more defined industries. But I think in most cases, and certainly most of the time when I'm working with clients, like, you get to write the script, you get to invent the role. And that's both really exciting and quite scary as well, particularly if you're used to a corporate structure. You're used to, these are your responsibilities, these are your KPIs, this is how you fit within this structure, and that can feel like a safety net. Like, I think it also can feel very oppressive, and that's, as you mentioned, where we come to things like the Great Resignation. People are really starting to question whether corporate culture is something that feels good to them, and I think in many cases it doesn't. But you've also got to be willing to sort of take this leap into the unknown and find what it is that you are uniquely positioned to sort of bring to the world, to the market, however you see it. And I think that involves a lot of, as I said, introspection and experimentation, and really coming back to what is it that you love, and what is that sort of unique journey that you've been on that not many others have, and then having the sort of entrepreneurial confidence to think, yes, I can build a viable career out of this.
Yeah, before we move to maybe talk a bit more about what people can do to make their work more regenerative, can you please define the word regenerative? And also, when we talk about sustainability, I feel there is a lot of talk about climate, but now nature is finally starting to take more of center stage in the agenda. So if you could also discuss that distinction, and how does regenerative connect to climate and nature?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. Okay, so the simplest definition that I have found that resonates for me of regenerative work was actually offered by Ryan James, who I mentioned, who runs Rebiz. And he describes it as work that actively supports life. I think that's it, work that actively supports life. For me, I expand that to thinking of work that is rooted in nature, climate, and community. And a really important factor here is all three. So I think that's where we often see the distinction that you were talking about, is that quite often, and I say this as someone who worked in climate tech for a long time, we look at those in kind of silos. So we're looking at climate, but we're not thinking about nature. I mean, I can tell you from 14 plus years in climate tech, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 examples of a technology where the benefits involved thinking about ecosystem or conservation or species preservation. Like it was extremely rare in my experience that nature and biodiversity was part of that conversation. Similarly, with community, I think that intersection is often missing as well. And, community in the sort of the widest sense of like, who are all of the stakeholders behind this, whatever it is, behind a business, an organization, a product, like, and really expanding our understanding of what the community around that means and what the impact is, and thinking about how the benefits are fairly shared. And I'm going to offer, I won't go into too much detail, but I think it's really helpful. So I think there are 4 questions that you can think about when you are sort of considering whether something feels like regenerative work. And I don't think it's important that there's a hard and fast in or out kind of definition. I think these questions are just really, really useful questions to open up our way of thinking when we're maybe examining work opportunities or something like that. So the questions are: does this work actively reduce pressure on our planet? And this to me is quite different to surface level sustainability claims, which are often about sort of maintaining the status quo and perhaps doing it a little bit more cleanly or efficiently, but ultimately we still want to grow the business. Like, that is not actively reducing pressure on our planet. So, the actively part is really important in that question. Question 2, will it improve life for all beings and distribute that benefit fairly? So as I said, all of stakeholders, human, non-human alike, and really expanding our understanding of who or what our work serves. Question 3, can it have impact quickly and at sufficient scale? This is an interesting one for me because I've been in the world where, we use words like hyperscale a lot. And often what that means is sort of grow your company as quickly as possibly to get to an exit. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think it is really important that we are looking for tangible impact within a meaningful time frame, because we're all aware, I don't need to tell your listeners that time is not on our side here. There is a real urgency behind the work that we need to do. And then the final question is, does it account for repercussions beyond its immediate location? So as I said, are we looking really at the entire system all along the supply chain to think about not only are the benefits shared, but am I aware of any sort of repercussions or consequences as a result of my work or my business? If anyone wants to go into those in more detail in my podcast, Regenerative Work Life, episode 3, I break those down in detail. But I just think those are really helpful starter questions for people when they're examining possible opportunities, because there is so much corporate greenwash out there, and it's so easy to get kind of enchanted by great sounding titles. And then often what I find is that people's lived reality just doesn't match the promise of that title. And really the simplest way to think about that is to question the purpose of the organization that you're working for. Because ultimately, if that purpose is to generate profit, if that's the primary purpose of the organization, that automatically puts that organization in an extractive place. That also automatically means that sustainability considerations, regenerative principles are going to come second to that primary purpose. And if you find yourself in a position where you're frustrated that you're not able to have the impact that you hoped you would have within a role, or that the promise of a role and the mission of an organization doesn't match up with your lived experience of the values of that organization, that's really what I would say, is just really think, why does this organization exist? And is it actually possible for this organization to operate in a way that isn't extractive?
Yeah, when you said those 4 points, I've been a business journalist for 5 years, so I've more or less reported on nearly every sector active in the world. And I was thinking, I can't think of many examples of industries that would fit even just the actively reducing pressure on
Mm.
nature, which, is probably the most immediate one for me to think about. Yeah, we need change, right? We need systemic change.
Yeah, and this is not about kind of on a personal level, this is not about creating some kind of impossible standard of perfection to think, oh my goodness, my work doesn't achieve all of those. I think it's more a calling to, to the direction that we want to go in. It's more about saying, it's not about have I, achieved 10 out of 10 in each of these four questions. It's like, but is there the potential to move in those directions? And does my work allow me to sit with those questions? Just as you said, you can look at sort of 5 years of business reporting and think, well, where are the examples? The important thing is to be asking the question. It's a really good question. Where are the examples of the organizations that that are really showing leadership in all of these areas?
Can you think of, because I'm thinking it sounds something a bit easier to achieve at a small scale. For example, if you're a small business owner and you work, I don't know, like an animal refuge, or you have a farm. But how about the larger scale? Can you think of any examples of companies or maybe even sectors um, where this is more or less achievable at a large scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think the immediate example that comes to mind, I think, would be around things like regenerative agriculture. Also, rewilding is the example that's really coming up for me. And I think there are so many. I don't really want to get into, honestly, because it's outside of my area, and I still don't know how I feel about it. But when we have the option to apply the sort of economic metrics around the benefits of conservation and biodiversity. Yeah, I still struggle with that, but I think that that rewilding is such a kind of fantastic example of like the abundance that nature brings to us, and how quickly nature can actually achieve all of those things that I just talked about. So this is the thing: anything that centers nature, like those four questions, that is what nature does. Nature looks after all of its stakeholders. Nature has benefits beyond its sort of immediate, if you have a particular project that is going to have ripple effects in the surrounding areas, creating wildlife corridors, whatever it might be. It very much actively reduces pressure. So I think that is sort of that's not really a direct answer to your question, but I think if we want to look to models and say, where are the models where everyone is benefiting and where it's sort of truly intersectional, and that the ripples are felt beyond the immediate vicinity, I think anything that has nature at the heart of it is going to lead us in the right direction.
And I suppose as well, the first way to understand whether a company is truly committed is understanding its level of transparency. So, do they have a plan, and is this plan publicly available, and is this plan actually practical, or is it more desires and wishes for the future?
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly right. It's not about saying go out and find an organization that is already doing all of these things. But, if you want to stay within a sort of larger organization, or if you are already in leadership in a larger organization, yeah, it's exactly that. It's about, like I say, it's about meaningfully sitting in those questions, means being very honest about where you are now, about what needs to change, about how quickly you're able to do that, what needs to be let go of in order to achieve those things. It takes really hard questions, and completely agree with you about transparency. And I think it also requires a real willingness to shift at the sort of systemic level, because I think one of the things that I see, I'm sure you see this as well, around sort of sustainability reporting and improvements, is that there's this sort of, it's like it's ring fenced to go, right, well, at the center, we still want to be doing exactly what we've done, and we still want to be generating an awful lot of profit and value for shareholders. But on the periphery, we're totally willing to make some changes happen, right? So out on the outsides, yeah, we can play around with that kind of stuff, but we're not willing to touch the core, right? And that's, that to me is like, perhaps that when we say real transparency, like, let's talk about the core. Let's talk about like your core reason for existing as an organization, and see like your fundamental model, and do we need to make some shifts there?
Yeah, I think we've seen it now in the news quite a bit that some companies are rowing back on their commitments because it was difficult and it was expensive, and now there is an economic crisis, so it's just essentially not convenient anymore. And that speaks volumes of the level of greenwashing that there is around. And actually, yeah, thinking about greenwashing, people looking to shift their career to regenerative, then they should really learn about words, right, and how greenwashing looks like and how to spot it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think those questions that I shared give you a framework. That's actually the title of the episode, is tips to avoid corporate greenwashing in your sustainability job search. And I think, and it's fine to try. I think it's great to try if you feel like you have leverage within an organization, if you feel like there's a real appetite for meaningful, like right down to the core change, then wonderful. I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to quit by any means, but I think, when we really let ourselves see it, there are many businesses that it's going to be really clear from the outset that there isn't that willingness to change there. And then I think you have to be really honest with yourself as an individual of like, am I just kidding myself, to be honest, that I'm going to make real change happen here? Or, am I letting myself be content with very incremental surface level change? Like, is there more that I can do? Because to come back to what we were discussing earlier, yes, our careers are 40 hours or something a week. Like, we should enjoy them. We should feel connected to them. They should benefit us as much as we benefit them. But also think of like the impact that we can have with that time and effort. Fundamentally, the organizations that are leading us towards destruction cannot continue if people don't go and work for them. Like, and I'm not talking about, if you need to put food on the table, I'm not talking about people in those situations. But for anyone that has kind of financial privilege, I think there's a real, I'm going to say opportunity, but also onus to really think about, like, does the work that I'm doing and the organization I'm doing it for, does that align with the kind of future that I want to see, the kind of world that I want to leave to my children? And if it doesn't, and you are in a position to make changes, I think it's really important to make those changes.
I find this sense of agency really inspiring. So I was listening to your podcast, and obviously we'll leave all the links in the show notes. And I was thinking that these days, with all the bad news that we hear, there is so much helplessness and climate anxiety. But when I listened to your podcast, I felt empowered. Every one of us that has as you said, financial privilege, some means to change their direction, we can do something about this, and it is possible. It's not possible, but sometimes when you are maybe in that corporate mindset, it's hard to see that there is a wealth of opportunities out there.
Yeah, and I would say you've touched right on one of the biggest fears that holds people back from having that impact and making those changes. The top 3 fears, I would say, are financial fear and fear around financial responsibilities or letting go of, maybe a very nice salary. Fear that they're not qualified to do the work, that they don't have the right skills and experience. And then the third one, I would say, is just the fear that there aren't those opportunities out there, which is why I sort of always emphasize that, the opportunities are endless. Like, this isn't one niche sector. That is not the way to think about regenerative work. Regenerative is a whole philosophy. It's how we organize our economies. It's going to be, I hope and believe, how we function into the future. So, it's understandable, but the idea that there are limited possibilities is to me personally a nonsense. I think we need everything and we need everyone, and it's going to look like so many different things. And as you said, we really do have agency here, to make that change happen. But what we have to think about is like, what are we willing to let go of? What are the fears that we might have to work through to get there? It really suits corporate culture to keep us trapped in those organizations, and it happens with salary, it happens with financial payouts, but it also happens by sort of, getting you to think that you're only really suitable to do one thing because that's what you've done for, this time before, and you can't, with this idea of not being qualified, to me is sort of it. Yes, if you want to do something really specific, if you want to work in, like, I don't know, soil restoration, then, yes, we're going to need experts in soil restoration, and that would require education and training. But think of all of the ancillary roles around that. Like, if we're going to have soil restoration projects, not everybody has their hands in the soil. I mean, you can if you want, but not everyone has their hands in the soil. And there's people who would need to communicate about those projects. There's people who need to bring financing into those projects, who need to build the teams, who need to connect those projects out with other projects in the community. Like, there's so many different kinds of roles. And I think that's, the possibilities really are abundant. And just think of what we gain from doing it, what we gain collectively from doing it as an individual, to be doing work that feels in purpose, which to me means that is aligned with your values and with what you love and what brings you joy and sparks your curiosity. That's it. That's such a gift to be able to do work that work in purpose. And that is the offer, I think, with regenerative work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're an excellent example of that, right? You found your space, you carved a business, you carved a career. And yeah, I was wondering how you approach the beginning of a journey with a new client when they come to you and say, I'm tired of corporate, I want to do regenerative.
Yeah, sure. So I think, so most people come to me, they are either still in their corporate job or maybe have just sort of left and are in what I kind of call the wilderness of after that corporate job, and not quite sure, how they're going to find their direction. And I think the first thing to say is that you have to start from the inside out. And most of us are trained to look at externalities. And when we think, okay, I'm going to make a big shift in my career, we look outside and we think, who can I talk to? How can I assess the market? Do I need to revamp my CV? That is not where I start. Those things may come with time. But for me, it's really about coming back to you and who you are. And it's actually a process of kind of self-actualization. I think we get so far removed from the things that really matter to us. So in my example, that was about coming back to nature and really reconnecting with nature, spending a lot of time in nature, a lot of time in my garden, really not understanding how or if those things were ever going to make sense in a career context, but just trusting that I loved them and that there was something there that I needed to find. And I think that's really my starting point for people is, what were the things that you loved as a child? What were your happiest moments? What is it that you wanted to be as a child? It doesn't necessarily mean that's the thing, but the energy in those things, the way they feel in our body, are a really important guide. And then, as I said, this sort of exploration process of actively letting yourself get lost and letting yourself play with ideas, letting yourself do courses just because they interest you, or read books for no good reason, and have interesting conversations and have new experiences. And it's important, and I can understand that it might sound sort of frivolous because it's not linear. But the point is, if we try to sort of fast track this and do this in a really linear way, we're going to end up in just a sort of maybe one step on from the career that we had before. We're going to end up back in a slightly better version of the same system that we were in before.
Sorry, because we need to change our mindset,
Exactly.
right? So we need to shift away from the corporate mindset.
That's exactly, and we need to build on different foundations. Not where do I sort of fit into the system, and like, what cog am I in the big machine? Like, really, yeah, who am I? What's really important? To me, that's all of us remembering that we are nature, that we are Earth, that we're all one. And that from that point, then starting to follow that curiosity, follow the play, and then you can start making some connections. Then you can start seeing, okay, there's interests here that kind of overlap, or there's a real theme. I had a client who worked in big tech in America. And we worked through some of the fears around quitting. We built a kind of financial plan for her. She was able to finally quit this role. And then as she started letting herself explore, we saw a really kind of clear theme around local agricultural projects, but also her heritage and how she wanted to connect back to her heritage and her culture and connect that with agriculture. And then we were also able to see that whenever she talked to me, I could see this clear theme that she was a real dot connector. She could really see where there were kind of missing gaps. And this is something she'd actually been doing in her role in tech. It was often her job to get different teams within the organization to work together on innovation projects. And so suddenly she kind of thought, oh, hold on a minute. I haven't lost everything. Same for me. I haven't lost 14 years of entrepreneurship and communications expertise. Like I just needed to step away from them, give some space, and then it kind of comes back. And then what you can do, you marry what it is that you love and really care about and are really passionate about with what you're good at. And then that's when you start to find your regenerative niche. And once you've identified that regenerative niche, then we can move into really creating an action plan for, is this a business that I'm going to build? Is it a consultancy? Is it the case of going out and finding the right roles? And then, and then it becomes a little bit more where people want to get to in the sort of the action plan. But those first early circular spiraling stages are really important. As you say, if we're going to genuinely shift to a different mindset and different foundations, and that's part of the system change.
Interesting. And yeah, really inspiring. I think I have one last question, which is when you talk to your former colleagues or clients or just people that are in climate tech, your previous career, do you think they find this new way of thinking controversial?
That's a really great question. So I will say, I still sit on the board at Life Size. I really believe in the work we do, and I still believe in our clients. But I think for me personally, my journey has been around climate tech in particular, has been from completely buying into the story that tech has the ability to save us. This is what was so attractive to me about clean tech back in 2010, when I was being introduced to these like very early stage companies with these incredible tech. And it was like, oh my goodness, we can innovate our way out of this. We can do such incredible things. I believe that, but I don't believe it can be the full answer. It's just, and I think that there's a real danger that we use that tech to allow us to continue to live the same lifestyles that we've always lived, to allow businesses to continue to operate pretty much in the same way that they always have. And we do it very much with a sort of exponential growth mindset. And we do it very often without thinking intersectionally. So I believe tech will be a very fundamental part of our future. We're always going to need to power hospitals, for example, like many, many more examples. It's really important, but I think we just need to be really aware that it cannot be the whole answer, and that there are deeper questions that need to be asked. So in terms of what people make for it, I've had a lot of amazing responses actually from people who just seem to sort of intuitively get it. I think it's interesting that people don't necessarily know that much about the word regenerative, but really connect with the concepts that I'm talking about. I think they're actually pretty universal when we just talk about work that has real meaning to you and real purpose. And I think, like me and my question around what impact has the last decade plus really had, I think there's a lot of people who feel that way. I've spoken to colleagues, not directly in climate tech, but who have been in sustainability within very large organizations at a very, very senior level for a long time who just sort of woke up and had that same realization of nothing's actually changing. And, and I think if we really want change to happen, we've got to make some radical shifts as individuals. And one of those beautiful radical shifts can be shifting to a regenerative work life.
Yeah, I suppose I've not been in the sustainability world long enough, but I suppose the people that you mentioned maybe started 10, 15 years ago were hoping to see a change, and now it's been a while and they haven't, and they've had this realization that we need to change course of action. And I suppose that's when nature starts becoming more part of the agenda, as we were saying earlier. Emissions are not enough, climate is not enough. So hopefully more people will start realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. And then we can take all of these, really important core ingredients, the innovation, the skills, the passion. I mean, I loved working in climate tech. I still do, because, everyone really believes, everyone is so motivated and so passionate. But I think, like you say, we need to sort of shift our mindsets, expand our awareness, and really make sure that we're using that passion in the most impactful way possible. I hope you enjoyed this conversation today. And let me just remind you before we finish that this journey out of corporate and into purposeful regenerative work that actually makes a difference in the world is deep work. It's hard work. It involves a lot of mindset shift, a lot of deconditioning, a lot of breaking of old habits, and really stepping outside of the system. That's something that can much more easily be done sometimes with a trusted guide by your side. If you're interested in learning more about regenerative coaching, I invite you to join me on a discovery call where we can discuss what it is that you want to achieve in your career and how I may be able to help you. Just go to regenerativeworklife.com/discovery and choose a time that works for you. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Regenerative Work Life podcast. It's time to put what you learnt today into practice. Remember, you were called to this work for good reason. Nature needs each and every one of us, and you can do this. If today's episode has been helpful, please take the time to share it with someone who needs a little guidance in stepping out of corporate and into regenerative. Learn more about how I can help you find your vision for a work life filled with purpose, impact, and joy at regenerativeworklife.com and connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search Alyssa Murphy. I'll see you back here soon for the next episode.